Hello and welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast. It's time for another episode of introducing Newcastle United's latest signing, and it's one I can't quite believe I'm bringing to you guys, but we're going to crack on, and it is John Ruddy, who signed for Newcastle United earlier this month on a free transfer. 37 years of age, a very experienced goalkeeper, not a signing anyone really expected. I'm joined by Alex Dicken, who's the Birmingham City reporter for Birmingham Live. Alex, welcome back to the podcast. How are you keeping?
Hi, Andrew. I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. When you saw this deal, land in your email, and you saw that John Ruddy had, I think it was maybe accepted that he was going to leave Birmingham, but to join Newcastle, were you a little bit surprised when you saw the news confirmed?
To be fair, I'd heard a whisper the week before it happened that he was going to be going to a Premier League club, possibly as a third choice, because that's kind of a more common move now, isn't it? Because Premier League clubs have such stacked goalkeeping departments, and they all kind of have almost an experienced guy who's there to set standards and be a coach almost to the younger first choice goalkeepers, and yeah, that seems to be the role that Ruddy has taken. I know he had interest from not just Birmingham City, who offered him a new contract to play for them in League One, but other clubs in League One and the Championship. But when you look at Newcastle, the opportunity to go there, and obviously there's going to be a massive financial incentive as well. Let's be honest. With Ruddy coming towards the end of his career, it probably makes sense for him, doesn't it, to financially and also to take that next step, because I can imagine he's probably going to want to go into coaching.
So we think he'll come in and be third choice goalkeeper when Newcastle United have said goodbye to Luis Karius, who played that role for the last couple of years. As things transpired, Karius actually ended up playing a cup final because of suspensions and other elements, which landed him in that starting 11. So goodness knows what might happen with John Ruddy at Newcastle United. But given the fact that he's played the majority of the last two seasons for Birmingham, 89 appearances in the last 2 years, do you think it'll be quite a difficult transition for him to go from playing week in, week out to not even being second choice, but being third choice?
I would say yes, because I also, before I took this job, I was the Wolves reporter, and so Ruddy was there for 5 years before, and he spent 4 of those years as a backup goalkeeper when they went to the Premier League, first to Rui Patricio and then to Jose Sarr. So he didn't play much football at all. He played cup games, and to be honest, during that spell at Wolves, especially towards the end, when he came into for those cup games, he looked a little bit rusty, as you would expect, because he's a goalkeeper who's completely out of practice in terms of match play, because he wouldn't have been playing for the under 21s to keep himself fresh and whatever. He'd just been training. So I think it maybe will be a little bit of a shock. He has spoken a number of times, not just towards the back end of his Wolves career, but throughout his time at Blues, that he really wants to play football and he's enjoying playing football. So, he's not going to get that at Newcastle. Let's face it. Unless, like you say, that nightmare scenario for Newcastle does occur and their first choice two goalkeepers do get injured, then John Ruddy's going to be on the bench or out of the squad most of the time.
I guess it will be difficult going from that first choice to not being, but at the same time, would you assume he's not going there just to make up the numbers, even if it looks like that way in practice? In his head, do you think he will be seeing a chance to push Nick Pope, to push Martin Dubravka, who we think will probably leave actually? They brought in the Nottingham Forest goalkeeper at the same time as John Ruddy, so he's likely to be the number two. But do you think, John will not just be sitting there thinking, I'm just going to collect my paycheck at the end of every week? I am going to try and push the two goalkeepers ahead of me.
Yeah, he's definitely not that guy. He's an exceptional trainer and also exceptional professional. And I'd imagine he probably sees this as kind of one step into the coaching world, in that he's going to be able to play with Nick Pope and the other goalkeeper, and also help them develop on the training ground alongside the Newcastle goalkeeping coach. So, he's been around the game for an awful long time. He's played for some decent clubs. He's played in the Premier League, played a lot of meets in the Premier League, played for England as well, albeit only once. Has a lot of experience, and he can pass on those experiences. In terms of his character, I don't think you've kind of got anything to worry about. That's one thing that has always been said about him throughout his time at Wolves and Birmingham City while I've been covering the clubs. An exceptional character, great to have around the place, great in the dressing room. And it shows that Blues had 6 managers, if you include all the interims last season, and John Ruddy played for all of them.
And you mentioned there one ship maybe into coaching. His experience has been pinpointed by Eddie Howe, who said when John Ruddy was announced to sign for Newcastle, Eddie Howe said a huge amount of experience adds a level of support and competition that we need. He's got a strong mentality and he is a leader. Um, Last season for Birmingham, very, very difficult. Ruddy has spoken to the Newcastle United website and said it was probably the toughest time of his career, with Birmingham getting relegated from the Championship. Did you see that leadership, during those dark days of last season at Birmingham?
Yeah, I mean, it was a dressing room that was really lacking in leaders, to be honest. You know, Ruddy was a contender to be captain of the club at the start of the season, but John Eustace, the manager at the time, went for somebody who was an outfield player, somebody in Deon Sanderson who he believed could grow into the role. Sanderson ended up being stripped of the captaincy in the final few weeks of the season, and Ruddy eventually took it over. And he was the natural fit. If you looked at an on-field guy, the leader of the team, John Ruddy was the most experienced and loudest voice. He tried to stress the importance of those final 9-10 fixtures to Blues when it looked like they were getting dragged into a relegation scrap, and impressed that onto his teammates. Those warnings clearly weren't heeded, and Blues ended up getting relegated. And to be fair, during those final 2 months of the season, John Ruddy fronted up an awful lot, in terms of media commitment. He did on the final day after the relegation, because he was captain at the time. He did in one of the, I think after one of the games against, was it Watford? I think it was Watford, when Blues had just kind of basically wasted another chance to pull themselves closer to the safety line. And he was very critical of his teammates, but also I know that he would have said those exact same things to the players inside the dressing room. He's someone a manager can rely on to help run a dressing room, that's for certain.
Well, that'll be a very good asset to have at Newcastle United. And I guess with Birmingham getting relegated to League One, probably a chance for someone to maybe hit the reset button, get players out and start afresh. But Birmingham wanted to keep John Ruddy at the club. And I know it's League One football, so some of our listeners will be just scratching their heads thinking this is not a compliment to John Ruddy. But I'm going to take it as one, the fact that Birmingham did want to keep him and offered him a new deal.
Yeah, and what I will say to the people listening is that Birmingham aren't recruiting for a League One team. They are recruiting for a Championship team. They've got a budget that's way bigger than anything else in League One, probably bigger than anything else League One's ever seen in terms of the wage they're able to offer these players that are coming in this summer. So, Ruddy would have been still seen as a Championship player, even though obviously he would have been playing League One for Blues. There was a bit of a conflict, as in like people weren't sure whether they should have kept him on, because he's a different style of goalkeeper to the route the Blues are saying they want to go down. They want to go down this possession-based route, have a guy who's really comfortable with his feet, and Blues tried to play that way at times with John Ruddy last season, and he didn't look overly comfortable. I'm not saying he's not good with his feet. He's okay with his feet. He's competent enough, but he's not absolutely exceptional in the way someone like Ryan Allsop, who Blues have just signed, is with his feet. He's a brilliant goalkeeper with his feet. Maybe not as good with his hands as John Ruddy, and people say that's the fundamentals of being a goalkeeper, but that's the route Blues wanted to go down. So I don't think they were, they were expecting him to stay. I think they offered him a contract in the knowledge they'd be quite happy if he did stay, because they know what a good character and what a good goalkeeper he is. But they were also prepared and comfortable if he moved on. That shows, because they've already signed 2 goalkeepers.
And we've got a couple of questions from our listeners. John asks, what can Ruddy bring to the team apart from his experience? What can we expect from him?
I mean, if he plays, he's excellent in terms of commanding his box. One of the best goalkeepers I've seen in terms of in the EFL, certainly in terms of coming out and claiming crosses and being that commanding presence on set pieces. He is an absolutely outstanding leader. I know people look at the experience. I think that and leadership are slightly different things. He's somebody who has a voice, who can also get messages across in the right way. He's very, he's very intelligent, speaks incredibly well in interviews. And even when I was covering Wolves, I remember a game back in, I think it was the lockdown time when they were playing Chelsea away, and obviously you could hear kind of everything that was going on in the stadium as a reporter, because there were no fans in there. And I just remember him effectively coaching the team from the substitutes bench behind the manager. He was screaming at the defence, telling them when to get up, screaming at players, in particular Kiana Herver. I remember him shouting at him and kind of instructing him through the game. He's somebody who commands a great level of respect, and somebody who does generally fit in very well inside any dressing room that he's been in.
You can see that again by the quotes from Eddie Howe. And Newcastle United have lost the likes of Matt Ritchie and Paul Dummett after the last season finished. You know, they let them go. Big leaders in the dressing room. And you can see maybe why Woody's been brought in just to kind of maybe, stop that loss being felt by Newcastle as it would do. Um, you mentioned there, I know he's good character, and we've spoken about him going from first choice to third choice. But it is going to be really interesting, isn't it? Because when Luis Karius came in and signed for Newcastle United, it was widely accepted. He knew what the deal was. You would not be playing, but he hadn't played anyway for I think about 18 months. He'd been out of action. You know, he hadn't had a club, so it was very clear. You know, he wasn't coming in from a position of playing week in week out. But Ruddy is, and I know you've said he's got a great character, great leader, but I think anyone's going to find that a little bit testing, you know, to have that change in your day to day work life.
Yeah, I would say that, but I've already seen John Ruddy do it once in his career. When he was at Wolves, he was their first choice goalkeeper in the Championship, and then Rui Patricio was signed in the first summer when they got back to the Premier League, and John Ruddy all of a sudden didn't play again. I think he played about 3 or 4 league games in his final 4 years at Wolves. He was back up to Patricio, and then, as I mentioned earlier, Jose Sarr, and there was never really any suggestion that he would play during that time. Ruddy obviously hoped and saw it as a live competition, but it wasn't that. It was quite clear it wasn't that. And the most impressive thing that I saw during that time is that both managers, first Nuno Espirito Santo and then Bruno Lage, both were absolutely desperate to keep him around their first team squad. So they were obviously very happy with him as their backup goalkeeper. Eventually, Wolves let him leave and he went to Blues, and obviously thought at that point in his career he wanted to have a couple of years playing first team again. But I don't think he'll have any issues adapting to that third choice role, to be honest.
That's good to hear. And you briefly mentioned it. You know that you think he'll eventually want to go into coaching. When you speak to Newcastle United youngsters and you ask them about the players who've been a big influence on them, who've put an arm around the shoulder when they have been fortunate enough to train with the first team, Matt Ritchie and Paul Dummett were always the names that first came out of their mouths. Do you think John Ruddy can slip into that role? Have you seen evidence of that while you've been covering Wolves in Birmingham, where he is kind of a mentor, for want of a better phrase, to those younger players?
Yeah, he will. From both clubs, there are a number of players who've name checked John Ruddy when talking in that kind of scenario. You mentioned Kiana Herver earlier. Morgan Gibbs White, young players who Wolves had who John Ruddy would have been a big influence on, and more recently at Birmingham City, Dion Sanderson, who obviously John Ruddy knew from Wolves before they reunited at Birmingham, and he spoke last summer about what a great leader John Ruddy is. So, and what a great character is now helpful in those situations. So, I think that's probably a gap in Newcastle's squad that Ruddy will fill quite well.
That's good to hear. And Newcastle were linked to James Trafford of Burnley. That deal now looks like it probably won't go ahead because of signed John Ruddy and they've signed the goalkeeper from Nottingham Forest. Now, last season, Newcastle had a rotten luck with injuries. Nick Pope was out for quite a while. If the same happened again, and for whatever reason, or even it was just a competitive reason, the ex-Forest goalkeeper against John Ruddy and how fancied John Ruddy, would Ruddy be able to step up and take that opportunity of being first choice should he be called upon?
I think he'd be capable of playing, to be honest. I think I think there were signs last season where he made a couple of mistakes and he wasn't as good as he was in his first season at Birmingham, but there wasn't a massive drop off. There definitely wasn't a big drop off in performance levels. And actually, towards the end of the season, I thought he looked probably as comfortable as he had all season. I think he was maybe impacted a little bit in the middle of the campaign when Blues obviously changed managers and were changing managers constantly. It felt like, and each manager obviously had a different message. Under Wayne Rooney, when the message was to play out from the back, I really struggled, and the two defenders, the two centre backs in front of him, didn't look good either. So, but after that, I think he had a decent enough campaign. It wasn't when you wouldn't look at John Ruddy last season and say, he was the reason Blues got relegated, because he wasn't. There were very few goals that you could put down to his individual mistakes. it was definitely other players in other areas of the field that caused the problems.
And I guess from a Newcastle United point of view, if you're weighing up spending 20 million on James Trafford, or you can bring John Ruddy in on a free transfer for a year, maybe offer him another year after, it probably makes sense financially that you can get an experienced goalkeeper, because he has played 123 times in the Premier League. He's got one England cap as well. And as we've said, the last 2 seasons, he's played the majority for Birmingham. It's not a bad free transfer, is it?
No, it feels like quite a solid free transfer, to be honest. In terms of the full package, I can't imagine Newcastle are paying absolutely massive amounts of money. They probably paid him more than Birmingham City would have been able to, but I can't imagine he's gone to Newcastle. He's earning 100 grand a week, and their first team goalkeeper's probably earning. So, I think it's if you can get someone like John Ruddy to do that job, like Manchester United have got someone like Tom Heaton to do that job. Um, I think it's a no-brainer in this day and age when clubs at the top end of the Premier League got so much financial resources. It makes sense to have that kind of more experienced third choice goalkeeper who can still play if called upon. I think Ruddy probably could. I think he could do a job in the short term in the Premier League if Newcastle required him to do that.
Could be Newcastle's very own Scott Carson. He's living the dream down at Manchester City, isn't he? John Ruddy said, "This is a massive club, massive opportunity. I'm really excited to get started. It was an opportunity I couldn't turn down. It's a huge club, uh, which is only going one way, and to be part of that, however big or small, is going to be very pleasing and very exciting." And I guess, while Birmingham and Newcastle are now 2 leagues apart, and their fortunes have been very, very different in recent years, one thing that probably ties them together is that fan base, very passionate fan base. They don't leave anything behind. They can be very vocal. So he's coming from one club with that passionate fan base to another, which that'll help him settle in and get used to what it's like up here, because he's experienced it down at Birmingham.
Yeah, and he'll be used to the stick if he is going to get some, because Birmingham City fans weren't showing coming forward last season. Um, yeah, two very passionate fan bases, as you say. Yeah, there'll be a few more fans inside Newcastle Stadium screaming at him if he does make any kind of mistake. But he's played for a big crowds all his career, hasn't he? So I'm sure he'll be able to handle the expectations that Newcastle fans have for him and their team.
Yeah, fingers crossed. And just to sign off then, Alex, just sum up what Newcastle United have got in John Ruddy and what they can expect from him in what is likely to be a third choice goalkeeper.
Yeah, firstly, someone who's seen an awful lot in football, not just in the last 12 months, where he's played under a shed load of managers and with loads of different players in probably the most chaotic season I've seen. He's a solid enough goalkeeper. He's played, as you say, a number of times, over 100 times in the Premier League. He's a very good character, a really good leader, somebody you would want inside your dressing room. I think that's always been a thing that's come back to me whenever I've spoken to anyone about John Ruddy. You would want him inside your dressing room. Yeah, I think it's a solid signing for Newcastle. I'm not saying you should be massively excited about it, because at the end of the day, he's a third choice goalkeeper that is maybe never going to play for your club. But if he is needed, I'm sure he'll do a good enough job.
Fantastic. Well, we wait to see how this one goes. But this is been introducing John Ruddy to you guys and Newcastle United fans. Thank you very much for listening and watching. Give the video a thumbs up on YouTube. Leave us a rating and review if you're listening via the podcast channel. Head over to chroniclelive.co.uk for all the latest Newcastle United news, including our daily transfer live blog with all the rumours, gossip and concrete stories. Thank you to Alex for providing the insight into John Ruddy, and for myself, I say, guys,